Welcome to Meteorology Matters, the podcast that dives deep into the science, chaos, and stories behind the weather that shapes our world. This show was created by meteorologist Rob Jones. Now, let's get into today's episode of Meteorology Matters.
It's great to be here, especially with all the energy in the air right now.
Absolutely. We are recording this on Saturday, January 17th, 2026. And if you are anywhere near South Florida or, frankly, if you're just tapped into sports at all right now, the atmosphere is just electric.
It really is.
We are less than 48 hours away from the College Football National Championship game, which is happening this Monday, January 19, Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Right, the biggest stage in amateur sports. And usually when we look at these huge events from a weather perspective, the conversation is pretty dry.
Yeah, it's logistical.
Exactly. It's always, is it going to rain during the halftime show, or how will the humidity affect the players, that kind of thing.
Right, it's a 3-hour forecast, basically. But for this deep dive, we wanted to zoom out, way, way out. Because while the football game is the headline, the real story here is the setting and the home team. When you look at the University of Miami, you realize their identity, the Hurricanes, isn't just a mascot they picked out of a hat because it sounded, intimidating.
No, not at all. In fact, it's arguably the most authentic identity in all of college sports.
I would agree with that.
Because it's rooted in trauma, in survival, and eventually in scientific mastery.
Exactly. This is a university and really a whole city that is it's inextricably linked to the weather, specifically to tropical cyclones.
Right.
We're talking about a history that goes back to the very foundation of the school. It's a story that involves a catastrophe that leveled the city, a legendary meeting to name the team, and then this pivot toward becoming one of the world's leading centers for atmospheric research.
It's a fascinating case study. I mean, you have to think about the geography.
Yeah.
South Florida is essentially a natural laboratory for atmospheric science.
A peninsula just sticking out there.
Right. It's sticking out into extremely warm water, sitting right in the bowling alley of the Atlantic Hurricane Basin. So the thesis we're exploring today is that the University of Miami, the Hurricanes, they really earned that name through blood and water.
Yeah.
Their identity was forged in the aftermath of a catastrophe that happened nearly a century ago. And that legacy, it spans from the football field all the way to the highest levels of government research.
So let's unpack this. To really understand the Hurricanes of 2026, we have to go back a full century. We have to start with the catalyst. And I'm not talking about a football game. I'm talking about the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926.
Yeah, and to really feel the weight of that event, you have to understand what Miami was like before the storm. We have to transport ourselves back to the Roaring '20s.
Mm-hmm.
But this wasn't just the Jazz Age. In Florida, this was the era of the Great Florida Land Boom.
The era of anything goes.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a time of just unbridled optimism and wild, wild speculation. People were pouring into the state to buy land, often sight unseen. And if we look at the numbers, they're just staggering. In 1920, the census counted about, 42,000 people in Miami?
Okay.
By 1926, just 6 years later, that number had exploded to over 100,000. And that's probably a conservative estimate, because it doesn't fully account for the surrounding settlements like Lemon City or Coconut Grove that were being swallowed up by the metro area.
So you have a population that has more than doubled in just half a decade. That creates a very specific kind of social environment, doesn't it?
It creates a dangerous one, a very dangerous one. You had a city filled with new residents who were optimistic, focused on getting rich, and this is the critical part, woefully undereducated about tropical cyclones.
Right. They had no idea what they were in for.
None. You have to remember the last major hurricane to hit that part of Florida had been back in 1910.
So you have a 15-year gap. In a transient boomtown where everyone just arrived, last week, 15 years might as well be a century. No one has that institutional memory.
Exactly. Most of these people had never seen the ocean turn on them. They saw the beach as a playground, not a potential threat. And to make matters worse, there was a false alarm earlier that same year.
Oh, that's not good.
No. In July of 1926, a weak storm hit the area. It caused some heavy rain, knocked over some patio furniture, but that was really about it.
And instead of that being a warning, it actually backfired.
It completely backfired. There's a quote from a resident at the time who joked that the July storm was made to order to scare the scoffers. But because it didn't do much damage, it had the opposite effect.
It made them complacent.
It solidified this dangerous complacency. People thought, oh, a hurricane? Is that all it is? I can handle that.
They were inoculated against fear right before the real plague arrived. So, okay, let's move to September 1926. The big blow is coming.
The storm we now call the Great Miami Hurricane,
Yeah.
it likely formed near the Cape Verde Islands around September 11th. But here's the thing we absolutely have to remember about 1926. We were effectively blind.
No satellites, no radar.
Nothing. No reconnaissance aircraft flying into the storm to take measurements. The storm was a ghost, a complete mystery. It was known only by a few ship reports out in the central Atlantic.
Wow.
It passed north of Puerto Rico, so it avoided the normal channels of communication in the Caribbean. So it just remained a mystery. It was a monster Category 4 storm just lurking out there in the blue, and nobody really knew exactly where it was or how strong it was.
That feels like a horror movie setup. The monster is in the house, but all the lights are out.
That is a perfect analogy. On the morning of September 17th, less than 24 hours before impact, there were still no hurricane warnings issued for Florida.
24 hours.
It wasn't until 11 a.m. that night, as the barometer began this just precipitous fall, that Richard Gray, the official in charge of the Miami Weather Bureau, finally hoisted the hurricane warnings.
At 11:00 p.m., the city is asleep. Or, it's the roaring 20s, so they're probably out partying.
And just a few hours later, their world ended. The eye of the hurricane passed over downtown Miami around 6:30 in the morning on September 18th. And this brings us to the greatest tragedy of this entire event, and something that really underscores the lack of meteorological knowledge at the time.
The lull.
The lull. The eye passed directly over the city. And if you've never been in the eye of a hurricane, it is a truly surreal experience.
I've heard stories. The wind just stops.
It stops. The sun might even come out. It becomes eerily quiet. In 1926, this lull lasted for about 35 minutes.
Just long enough to be deceptive.
Exactly. Residents, who we already established didn't understand the mechanics of a cyclone, thought the storm was over.
They thought they had survived it.
They emerged from their shelters. People went out into the streets. There are reports that the streets were crowded with people inspecting the damage, looking at the wreckage.
Oh, no.
Some people even started crossing the causeways back to the mainland from Miami Beach. They were completely, utterly exposed.
And then the backside of the storm hits.
And it hit with a vengeance. The wind shifted to the southeast. And in Miami, a southeasterly wind is the worst-case scenario.
Because it pushes the water straight from the Atlantic into the bay.
Directly into Biscayne Bay. This created a massive storm surge. A 10-foot wall of water swept over Miami Beach and extended blocks into the city of Miami. The water from the Atlantic effectively met the water from the bay. It was a catastrophe.
The devastation statistics, they're hard to wrap your head around, even today.
They're staggering. The Red Cross reported 372 deaths, but historians estimate the real number was likely much, much higher.
Right, because of all the uncounted workers.
Exactly. So many transient laborers weren't counted in official records. It could have been over 500. And then over 6,000 injuries. And the financial cost, in 1926 dollars, it was estimated at $105 million.
Which is just a massive amount of money for that time.
It's astronomical.
Yeah.
If you adjust that for inflation and wealth to today's landscape, we're talking about damages that would exceed $164 billion.
Wow.
It effectively ended the 1920s land boom. The party was over. The bubble had burst.
And this is where the University of Miami enters the picture. Because the university wasn't founded decades later in memory of this storm. It was right there trying to take its first breath when this happened.
Exactly. The University of Miami was founded in 1925. The Great Miami Hurricane hit in September 1926. It actually delayed the opening of their very first fall semester.
Talk about a rough start. You're trying to launch a brand new university and your city gets leveled days before classes are supposed to start.
It's the definition of a baptism by fire, or in this case by wind and water. The university wasn't just named after storms. It was literally born in the wreckage of one.
I can't imagine. The campus must have been a mess.
Covered in debris. The economy that was supposed to support the school had completely collapsed. And that timing, that's what makes the whole identity so potent.
Okay, so let's talk about that name, the Hurricanes. How did that stick? Because usually when a city is destroyed by something, people want to forget it. They don't want to be reminded of the trauma every Saturday on the football field.
That's what's so fascinating. It's this incredible psychological pivot. The legend goes that the 1927 football team held a meeting to choose a name. Now, you have to imagine the scene. The university dignitaries, the people concerned with image and tourism and marketing, they wanted something pleasant.
Something safe.
Right. They were pushing for names based on local flora or fauna.
I can't imagine the University of Miami hibiscus striking fear into the hearts of opponents. Or like the University of Miami Pelicans.
Exactly. It doesn't quite have that badge. And apparently, the players couldn't imagine it either.
Hmm.
There's a famous story about a player named Porter Norris who was an end on that 1926 team. When he heard these soft, nature-based names being suggested, he reportedly stood up and said the players wouldn't stand for it.
Good for him.
And he suggested Hurricanes, specifically because their opening game had been postponed by the storm.
It's a reclaiming of power, isn't it?
Precisely. It is psychological judo. Instead of fearing the force that destroyed their city and delayed their start, they adopted it. They took the chaos and they made it their own.
And it caught on.
It did. By 1929, the student newspaper had officially renamed itself the Miami Hurricane. The identity was set in stone.
And you can't have the Hurricanes without the mascot. And Miami has one of the most unique and I would say misunderstood mascots in all of college sports, Sebastian the Ibis.
Sebastian is an icon. But you're right, on the surface, it is a bit confusing. An ibis is a marsh bird.
Right, a long-legged wading bird. It doesn't exactly look like a killer, so why the Ibis?
It's all about the folklore. It's rooted in folklore that's specific to the Everglades, though some people trace the symbolism all the way back to ancient Egypt, where the ibis was associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom.
Okay.
But for the University of Miami, the legend is that the ibis is the last wildlife to take shelter before a hurricane hits.
And the first to reappear after the storm passes?
Exactly.
So it's a symbol of resilience.
It represents the ability to weather the storm. The ibis stands firm until the last possible second and is the first sign that life is going to go on after the destruction. It's the perfect counterpart to the chaotic energy of a hurricane. You have the storm and you have the survivor.
And Sebastian? Well, Sebastian hasn't always looked the way he does now. He's got quite an evolution.
He does. The character demands swagger now, but the early versions were very humble. In 1957, a dorm called San Sebastian Hall sponsored an Ibis entry in the homecoming celebration.
And that's where the name comes from.
That's where the name Sebastian comes from. It was named after the residence hall.
I love that. It's not named after some mythical hero, but a dorm building.
And the costume. Well, the early versions were rough. In 1958, a student named John Stormont created a costume that was basically glued, sewn, and pinned together. They actually called it Icky.
Icky? That doesn't exactly scream national champion.
No, the swagger definitely came later. But it's important to note that performing as Sebastian today is a very serious business. There are strict physical requirements.
I've heard this. You have to be a certain height.
Right. You have to be between 5'8" and 6'3" to fit the suit properly. And there's a code of silence.
Like a superhero's secret identity.
Exactly. The students who perform as Sebastian are not allowed to reveal their identity until they graduate. It maintains the mystique. The character demands a certain attitude, that famous you swagger. You have to be able to command an entire stadium without ever saying a word.
Okay, so we have the name, born from the 1926 disaster. We have the mascot, symbolizing resilience in the face of that disaster. But the University of Miami's connection to weather goes way, way deeper than just Saturday football games. This place is a legitimate scientific heavyweight.
It is, and this is where we shift from symbolism to hard science. We have to talk about the Rosenstiel School of Marine, Atmospheric, and Earth Science.
Which is located out on Virginia Key, right?
Yes, just off the mainland. And it is a powerhouse for oceanographic and atmospheric research. Their entire mission is fundamentally about understanding the natural processes that affect weather and climate. And because of where they're located, I mean literally in the tropics, surrounded by warm water, they specialize in tropical meteorology, cloud processes, and climate dynamics.
So basically they studied the very monsters that the football team is named after.
And they don't do it alone. There's a massive partnership there called CEMAS.
That's the Cooperative Institute for Marine and Atmospheric Studies.
Right. And CEMAS is a center of excellence that's linked directly with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Or NOAA.
NOAA, yes. This partnership is crucial because it focuses on what we in the field call transitioning research into operations.
What does that mean in plain English for us?
It means they aren't just doing theoretical math on a whiteboard just for the sake of publishing a paper.
Okay.
They're taking that science and turning it into practical, usable tools that help forecast storms. They're working on improving the models that predict where a hurricane will go and how strong it will get. They're doing the work that helps prevent another 1926 scenario where people are caught completely unaware.
And speaking of forecasting, there's a really cool historical nugget here that I think a lot of people just don't realize. For a long, long time, the National Hurricane Center, the place that the entire country looks to when a storm is brewing, was literally on the UM campus.
It was. This is a fascinating chapter in meteorological history. In 1943, hurricane forecasting officially became centered in Miami. But in 1964, the National Hurricane Center and the Miami Weather Bureau office moved into the University of Miami Computer Building in Coral Gables.
So you had the federal government's top hurricane experts sharing a hallway with university researchers.
Exactly. It created this incredible synergy, this feedback loop of ideas and data. And they stayed there until 1995.
What happened in 95?
Well, the reason they moved was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Andrew damaged the radar in the facilities, and they realized they needed a true bunker, a hurricane-hardened facility which they eventually built at Florida International University. But for those crucial decades, the 60s, 70s, 80s, the heart of hurricane hunting was beating right there in Coral Gables.
And just think about how much the technology changed during that time. If you look at the snapshots of history from that era, it's just wild to see how far we've come.
It's a journey from analog to digital, truly. In the 1950s, before they even moved to the campus, all the weather data was moving via teletype machines.
Clack, click, clack. That old sound.
That's it. And telephone circuits. Then in 1959, the radar era really begins. The very first WSR-57, which stands for Weather Surveillance Radar, 1957, was commissioned at the Miami office.
And I've seen pictures of this. It doesn't look anything like the computer screens we have now with the colorful maps.
No, not at all. Forecasters used grease pencils. They would literally trace the storms directly on the radar screens. They'd physically draw the outer bands and the eye on the glass to track the movement.
That feels so tactile, so hands-on.
It was. And then you move into the 60s and 70s, and the satellite era arrives. You get Tyros, Nimbus, the GOES satellites. Suddenly we aren't blind in the Atlantic anymore like they were in 1926.
We can see them coming.
But even then, the images were received via phone lines on these special processors. It wasn't instant high-def video like we get on our phones today.
And there was the famous wall map.
The wall map. In the operations area, they had this massive map where legends like Dr. Neil Frank would track the entire season's activity. It was the focal point of the whole room. It was where the story of the hurricane season was told, pin by pin, line by line.
There is one other piece of tech, or maybe old school tech is a better word for it, that I think is really cool. The amateur radio station.
WX4NHC.
Sounds like a license plate.
It's a call sign. It was established in 1980 at the National Hurricane Center. And even today, in the age of satellites and supercomputers, this is vital. When a storm is within 300 miles of landfall, ham radio operators activate.
Why? I mean, what can they do that a satellite can't?
Ground truth. That's the key. Satellites can tell you cloud top temperatures, radar can tell you rain density, but a ham radio operator can say, I am looking out my window and a tree just snapped, or the water is up to my front step right now. They provide eyewitness damage reports and real-time data that fills in the gaps of what the remote sensing is seeing.
It brings the human element back into the data.
Exactly. It's like crowdsourcing survival information. It's incredible.
That is incredible. Now, before we move on, I want to address a bit of a rumor, a myth, really, that's been floating around.
Ah, we talked about Kate.
We are talking about Hurricane Kate. If you dig into the lore, sometimes you see references, even in some student newspapers, like an article from 2007 referring to that 1926 storm as Hurricane Kate.
Yeah, we need to debunk this immediately. There was no Hurricane Kate in 1926.
So where in the world does that come from?
It's most likely a retrospective error, or maybe confusion with a much later storm. But historically, it is completely impossible.
Because we weren't naming storms back then.
Correct. In the 1920s, storms were tracked by their latitude and longitude.
So it'd be the storm at 25 north, 80 west.
Exactly. Which, as you can imagine, is cumbersome. And it's really prone to error. If you have two storms active at the same time, say one in the Gulf of Mexico and one in the Atlantic, and a radio broadcaster says the storm at 25 north, a listener might get confused about which storm they actually mean.
That sounds really dangerous.
It was. Confusion spreads rumors and can lead to bad decisions. That is actually why naming started in the first place. It is to streamline communication and avoid that very confusion. The U.S. officially began using female names in 1953.
1953, so almost 30 years after the 1926 storm.
Right. And then in 1979, they added male names to the Atlantic list to be more equitable. So Kate is definitely a modern invention or just a mistake. The 1926 storm is simply known as the Great Miami Hurricane.
And speaking of names, you mentioned retired names earlier. It's a similar concept of memory, right?
Yes. When a storm is particularly deadly or costly, the name is retired from the 6-year rotation out of sensitivity. Names like Andrew, Katrina, Ian, Helene, or Milton. You won't see those names used for an Atlantic storm again. It's a way of honoring the history and the tragedy associated with them.
Okay, so we've got the history, the science, the myth-busting. Now let's bring it all back to the present, back to the field. Because this Monday, the Hurricanes take the field. And when they do, they're carrying all of this history with them.
They really are. The Hurricanes name isn't just a label on a jersey. It's evolved into a style of play, a philosophy.
It's that championship DNA you hear about.
Exactly. If you look at their history, the national championships in 1983, 1987, 1989, 1991, and that legendary 2001 team, those teams didn't just win, they swarmed people. They played with the chaotic, high-pressure energy that really mirrored the storm they were named after.
The 1983 championship is the perfect example, the miracle in Miami.
A true underdog story. They were playing Nebraska, a team that was considered unbeatable, just one of the greatest college teams ever assembled. And Miami, this program that had almost been dropped just a few years prior, rose up like a sudden storm and shocked the entire world. It was a turning point for the program.
And the atmosphere they create, I mean, the entrance, the smoke.
That is one of the best traditions in all of college football and has such a great origin story. It started back in the 1950s. A man named Bob Nallett, who was the transportation director at the time, wanted to spice up the entrance, so he used fire extinguishers to create this white cloud.
And it looks exactly like a storm surge or a cloud wall rolling in.
It mimics the chaos and the power of a hurricane landfall, the players running through that whiteout. It's intimidating. It signals to everyone in the stadium that the storm has arrived.
And then there's the Four Fingers tradition.
At the start of the fourth quarter, players and fans hold up four fingers.
What does that symbolize to you from this meteorological perspective we've been talking about?
Well, in football terms, it means the game is won or lost in the final period. It's about endurance and finishing strong. But if we connect it to our theme today, surviving a hurricane is all about endurance. It's about getting through the first eye wall, getting through the deceptive lull, and then surviving the backside of the storm. You have to last until the very end.
You have to win the fourth quarter of the storm.
Exactly. Holding up those four fingers is a statement. It says, we are still here, we are still standing, and we're going to finish this.
That is really powerful. It ties it all together so perfectly.
It does. It shows that this identity is so cohesive. From the tragedy of 1926 to the research labs at Rosenstahl to the smoke in the tunnel, it is all one continuous story.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just look at the big picture here.
The big picture is resilience. The University of Miami is truly a storm-built institution. The city was leveled in 1926. It could have folded. The university could have failed before it even properly opened. But instead, they took the name of the very thing that destroyed them. They wore it on their chests. And then they decided to study it, to master the science of it.
And now they represent that city on the national stage.
Precisely. The name stands for so much more than a football team. It represents a city's ability to rebuild, to adapt, and to eventually study and understand the very forces that threaten it. It's a cycle of destruction and creation, of chaos and knowledge.
So whether you're watching the game this Monday or watching the skies during hurricane season, remember, meteorology matters.
It certainly does.
If you want to track the weather yourself or just learn more about hurricane history, make sure to follow meteorologist Rob Jones. You can find him on Instagram @meteorologist. That is a nice and easy one to remember.
Great handle.
On TikTok, look for TV Meteorologist. And on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane. You can find the full Meteorology Matters podcast playlist there as well.
And please, if you enjoyed this discussion, take a second to like, follow, comment, and rate the podcast. It really does help us keep these conversations coming.
We appreciate you listening. Enjoy the championship game, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next one.
Stay safe out there.